Shalom and welcome back to By His Grace Marriage Ministry Podcast. My name's Amanda, and I pray that you all are having a blessed and productive preparation day as it is the sixth day of the week. Trying not to say weekdays anymore. And for those of you that keep the 7-day Sabbath, it's almost Shabbat, not long from now. So come evening time. So praise be to Yah. For those of you that keep it, I pray that you're having a blessed and productive preparation day. Praise be to Yah. And in case I don't come on tomorrow, I pray you all have a very blessed and restful Shabbat. All right, so welcome to today's episode. This is going to be the day where I'm going to release a word that I have for you all that's been on my heart concerning a specific topic. I did touch a little bit on it in my last episode where I was giving an update in regards to the audio scriptures that I've been doing on the podcast. And today's the day that I'm going to release that word. So I went ahead and put everything together, and I do want to share that today. But before I get into that, I want to make one more quick update in regards to the audio scriptures. So yesterday, I went ahead in the evening time, decided to, after I shared with all of you what's been going on, I've been trying to record and release the Book of Jubilees in audio, and I've been having some major problems with that, which are just odd. So anyways, I won't go into that because I already explained that a few times, but I had mentioned that I was going to go ahead and skip to the book of Jashar to see if I can maybe do that, since Jashar is similar to Jubilees. Because Jubilee and Jashar, what they both have in common is they go into detail about majority of what goes on in the book of Genesis. So I said, okay, let's just go to Jashar. So I went ahead and I recorded the first 5 chapters of Jashar, and I published it. And sadly, unfortunately, literally 10 minutes later, I got another email about possible infringing and so on. I was devastated. I went ahead and submitted an appeal because at this point, I don't understand what's going on. The biggest thing for me and what's so confusing is that I have over 200 episodes on this podcast. This has never happened to me until I started the audio scriptures. But the even weirder and strange thing is that I've recorded the whole book of the Testament of 12 Patriarchs with no issues. I recorded the whole book of Sirach with no issues. I recorded the whole book of Enoch with no issues, and the whole book of Tobit with no issues. The only thing I can possibly think of, and I don't know, y'all let me know what your thoughts are on this. Please send me an email if you have any ideas of what this could be, or maybe if any of you are podcasters out there, please let me know. The only thing I could think of why it's happening with Jubilees and Jashar is because they both are very, very similar to the book of Genesis, right? It talks about the same things, but just goes into more detail. And maybe that's why they're flagging it, because maybe they're thinking it's copyright because it sounds like Genesis, but it's not the title, right? It's Jubilees or it's Jashar. That's the only thing I can think of, because how is it I've been able to record other scripture, other books, and this isn't happening? But yet it is with Jubilees and Jashar, and that's what they have in common, right? The book of Tobit doesn't talk about that. The book of Enoch doesn't talk about that. The book of Sirach doesn't talk about that. The book of the Testament of 12 Patriarchs doesn't talk about that. That's the only thing I can think of. So what I'm going to do moving forward is I'm either going to start the book of 2nd Esdras, also known as 4th Esdras, or the writings of Abraham. But the only thing with the writings of Abraham is it could sound like Genesis as well. I don't know. I'm just not sure. And the thing is, I don't want to keep having this happen, because what if it could result in them taking down my podcast? And again, I've put so much work into this podcast. It's my ministry. I would just be heartbroken. I would be devastated if that happened. So I don't want to keep doing this to where they're like, oh, she keeps copywriting, or she keeps this or that or whatever. I just don't want to take that chance, So if y'all could just please continue to pray concerning this issue. And if y'all have any ideas whatsoever, I would love to hear from you. Please send me an email because I'm at a loss at this point. And, I'm sad because Julius and Jashar, I was so excited to get on the podcast. I really wanted to release that to you all. I mean, of course, you all have access to it. You can read it anytime. But I know, a lot of you were probably looking forward to just being able to listen to it. And that's why I'm doing this project. For those of you that maybe want to listen better, maybe it's just better for you to listen to scriptures versus reading it. Or maybe you're just in a really busy season and it would just, benefit you more if you could listen to scriptures versus reading it. And that's why I wanted to do it. And these are really great books. Jubilees and Jashar are amazing books. So I don't know what's going on, I don't know what's going on, but after I release this episode, I'm going to either do Second Esdras or the writings of Abraham, and I guess see what happens. But at the same time, I'm kind of scared because, and I know I shouldn't be fearful, but I don't want to push it. I don't want to lose my podcast. So I don't know if y'all could just please be in prayer for that. But I was definitely very frustrated and somewhat angry because it just doesn't make any sense. So I actually went ahead. I wasn't going to, but I submitted another appeal, because I don't understand what's going on. So if they can at least tell me what it is, I can find a way around it. Maybe if I change the title or something like that, or say an extension of Genesis, or, and then put in the description what, the book, and I don't know. I don't know. So anyways, but I just want to let you all know, I tried to publish the book of Jashar, the first 5 chapters, and unfortunately it didn't work out. However, what I did notice is the platform that I use to record and edit and publish my episodes, it reflects that I did it, and it shows there's actually 1 play. But when I go on Spotify itself, it's not there. The episode's been removed. So I don't know how someone listened to it. It must be available on another podcast platform, which, yes, I believe my podcast is available on other platforms. However, I did get an email fairly recently that a lot of these podcast platforms, are getting ready to be removed. I don't know why. I know Spotify is remaining, and YouTube is getting ready, or already has made this whole podcast thing, which I try to do, and it didn't work out. So I don't know. I guess if y'all want to try to search my podcast on a different platform, and if it pops up, see if the episode is there. See if it happens to be there, and then take a listen if you can before it gets removed. I guess I don't know. So I'm sorry, y'all, that I can't get it to work out, but I'm not going to give up. I'm going to see what else I can do. And go from there. So, all right, well, praise Yah. So let's go ahead and go into the word that I have for you all today. It's a quote unquote marriage word or relational word that I want to share with you all. So before I actually go into what exactly I wanted to share, I just wanted to go ahead and explain this. So this is a topic that is very, very important, and I have talked about it. I think if you go to season 7 of the podcast towards the end, I released quite a few episodes in regards to this topic. So I'm going to be talking today about the dangers of lust and soul ties and things like that. Now, I talked about this again earlier in the podcast. I did quite a few episodes. I can't remember all of them or the names of them, but I know I talked a lot about how affairs happen, the types of different affairs that can occur, attraction, how it can be fatal, like Fatal Attraction, like the movie. I just talked a lot about these things and, just shared, the dangers of even something as simple as, if you're married, befriending, the opposite sex, things like that. I went into a lot with these episodes. So I did say in yesterday's episode that, if you wanted to just kind of learn more about this or hear more about this, there are a few episodes that I released. I think one I titled Fatal Attraction, that I think was 2 parts. I did an episode, I think, on emotional affairs, because yes, there can be emotional affairs. I talked about, can there be forgiveness after infidelity, right? After adultery, things like that. So yeah, there's quite a few episodes here on the podcast in regards to this topic. And I feel led to do another episode in regards to the same topic. And part of the reason is because, and I'm going to share towards the end of this episode, something personal from my life that kind of ties in with this, that I want to share in hopes that it'll help somebody. I'm not going to go into too much detail because this is something that's was a very, very difficult trial for me, and something that I'm just still navigating out of and things like that. So as a matter of fact, right around the time that I released those episodes in regards to those topics was right around the time that I was actually in the thick of this trial, which is part of the reason why I think maybe Yahuwah might have allowed it to happen, was for me to be able to kind of share that on the podcast. This is a marriage ministry. This is a podcast that talks about marriage and relationships and family. And I wanted this to be a podcast that not only brings truth to these areas, but I also want to talk about every area, including the possibilities of infidelity, adultery, fornication, things like that, right? It's important to touch all topics in all areas of relationships, okay? And so, believe it or not, I actually had a closed mindset in that area before this happened to me, because I used to think, how could anybody that says they love somebody, they're married to somebody, this, that, and the next thing, how can you be unfaithful? How can you cheat? How can you do those things? It would literally give me like this anger, and it would make me feel kind of ill, and I would just be like, man, how can people do that? How can you go out and cheat and be with somebody else? And brothers and sisters, it wasn't until I went through what I went through that I was able to have my eyes open and have a better understanding of how these things actually happen. And it's also all throughout the scriptures. There are plenty of examples and accounts, several, okay, that actually talk about this. And that's what I'm going to be sharing in today's episode. I'm going to be sharing various scriptures on this matter. And then towards the end, I'm going to share something from my personal life. Again, not in full detail, but just to kind of tie into what I'm sharing today. So I want to start off by saying this, okay, is that one thing that I learned is that I want to say probably 70 to 80% of the time, people aren't actively looking to cheat, okay? It's just not, Yahuwah created us to be people that yearn to fellowship with others, with him and with others, to be relational, right? He created us to be that way. And I believe that when he created these marriage unions, that they're to be, two people becoming one. I don't believe that Yahuwah created it to be where, you see one person with many people, whether at the same time or just throughout your life. I don't believe that was his purpose to that. I don't believe that's how it was supposed to be, which, yes, I understand that we see a lot in the Bible of men often having, more than one wife. And again, that's still something I'm studying. And when I have more information about that, I will definitely share it within the podcast. But, aside from that, I believe that, Yahuwah created it to be, one man, one woman, and things like that. Now, the problem is that because, we had a fall, and now we have sin in this world, we struggle with our flesh, we struggle with temptation, okay? And there's a scripture that I want to start off with that John talks about, and this is actually in the book of 1 John, or Yohanan, chapter 2, verse 16. And it says, because all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. Okay? So here we see that oftentimes when talking about lust in a way that, because there's different types of lust, right? There's different types of lust. There can be a lust for money. Okay, there can be a lust for food. There could be all kinds of different lusts. Okay, today specifically, we're going to be talking about sexual lust, infidelity, adultery, fornication. That's what we're going to be looking at today. But he says it right here. The lust of the flesh, right? Which is going to bring me to my next scripture that I want to share with you all, because then Paul talks about the works of the flesh, right? So we'll read that here in a moment. But, because before that in verse 15, John says, do not love the world nor that which is in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And that's when he says, because all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but in the world. So we know that when it comes to lusting after somebody, that's always the start, right, of an affair. Or becoming obsessed with somebody or infatuated with somebody, or again, just committing the sin of fornication and adultery. It starts with the lust of the eyes, okay? Because we're viewing it with the eyes. It's how we take in, right? And we're going to see this in some of the accounts that we're going to be reading today, okay? And I'm also going to kind of share how I experienced that as well in my own personal trial that I endured concerning this topic, okay? So John tells us there, right, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and then the pride of life. And so again, lust of the eyes, this is how it starts. And one of the accounts that we're going to read is the Testament of Reuben, where he says, we take it in with our eyes, even Yahushua, there's a scripture, and I didn't write it down, but he says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. And of course, he doesn't mean literally, but spiritually speaking, turn away from it. Don't look at it. And I think one of the biggest problems in our world today, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but one of the biggest problems is that, of course, we know sexual temptation is everywhere. It's all over. It's in our TV programs. Even commercials are sexualized and perverted. It's in our movies. It's in the music. And then, of course, you have pornography that's everywhere. That's you can have access to even through YouTube. YouTube has some very disgusting, perverted things on YouTube as well that anybody could basically access. And then, sadly, we have women that walk around provocatively. They have, all this makeup on. They have their hair in these various hairstyles, and they do this to attract men. But what they're not realizing is that when they're walking around with a ton of makeup, when they're walking around with their hair done up in different ways, and they're walking around in skin-tight clothing, or they're half naked or whatever, they're causing brothers to stumble because they're taking this in with their eyes. And that's where it all begins. And remember, too, there's a saying, and it's true, men fall in love through the eyes, but not just fall in love through the eyes, they will also lust. And let me tell you something, sisters, it happens to women too. Okay? That's why John says what he says. Okay? The other problem is that Satan, in his workings in the world, his systems, let's face it, and I've talked about this a lot in my podcast throughout, I truly believe through scripture and how Yahuwah created it to be, the women's jobs are in their homes. That's where we're to be. Taking care of our homes and our children and so on. What happened is that in our world and in our society, Satan's systems has now taken women out of the homes, and they are now in the workplaces. And what happens is that gives them more access to talking and conversing with men who are not their husbands. And then what happens is what happens that I explained in my other episodes, where they make connections, they make emotional connections, they become attracted to one another, especially with the way women are dressing nowadays. You see what I mean? Women are now out of the homes, they're in the workplaces, they're all over the place, and that gives them even more of an opening for these things to take place. You see what I'm saying? So it's not good, brothers and sisters. And one thing I do want to mention before I forget is Brother Adam Fink from the Fellowship Parable of the Vineyard, which is fellowship that I am a part of. He has an incredible video called, I think it's called Breaking Lust, on his channel. I highly, highly recommend that if any of you are struggling with what we're talking about today, please watch that video. He did an amazing job talking about this topic as well, and just helping to break out of these things. So Praise be to Yah. And I will put that in the description of this episode so that y'all can see that and check that video out if you feel led to. So the next scripture that I want to go to, if I can find it here, give me just a moment, please, is Galatians. Is it chapter 5 or chapter 6? Okay, chapter 5. I want to just quickly read the works of the flesh. Okay, so we're going to start at verse 17. It says, "For the flesh lusts against the ruach, and the ruach against the flesh, and these are opposed to each other, so that you do not do what you desire to do." So for those of you who don't know, ruach is Hebrew for spirit. Verse 18, "But if you are led by the ruach, you are not under Torah." Verse 19, "And the works of the flesh are well known, which are adultery, whoring," which in some translations of the Bible is fornication, "uncleanness, indecency, idolatry, drug sorcery, hatred, quarrels, jealousies, fits of rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, factions, envy, murders, drunkenness, wild parties." I think there's some translations that even say orgies, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And then he says, "And the like, of which I forewarn you, even as I also said before, that those who practice such as these shall not inherit the reign of Elohim." And then in verse 22, he goes on to talk about the fruits of the Ruach, or the fruits of the Spirit, okay? So notice, in the works of the flesh, Paul mentions adultery and fornication and uncleanness, okay? These are a part of the works of the flesh. Okay, so this is a huge thing, brothers and sisters. Okay, that's already two accounts that, or two scriptures that let us know that the lust of the flesh and the works of the flesh, right? The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, okay, is a danger to us and cause us to become a great sin. And here's the thing about adultery and fornication is that we not only sin against Yahuwah, we sin against ourselves. Now, adultery and fornication are two separate things. People say, oh, it's the same thing. No, adultery means when you are being unfaithful to someone or something, because adultery we can even be unfaithful to Yahuwah, right? By how? By serving other gods, okay? We're basically cheating on Yahuwah, if you will, okay? That's another way to look at adultery. So if you're married, okay, and you commit an emotional affair, or a physical affair, whatever, and you have this, you're lusting after somebody who's not your spouse, that is adultery. Fornication is more of like having sex outside marriage, and so on and so forth, right? Some will say masturbation as well, and just things like that, viewing porn, all those kinds of things. And here's the thing, brothers and sisters, what's sad, and I've talked about this many times before, what's really sad is that a lot of churches out there, a lot of religions, a lot of denominations will basically teach that sex is this bad thing, to where by the time believers get married and they go to consummate or be intimate with their spouse, they have this distorted view and feelings towards sex. Why? Because number one, Hasatan, Satan, has taken sex and perverted it. And it's everywhere, right? It's perverted, it's tempting. It's just, he's taken it and just basically destroyed it. The second thing is then you have all these, churches of men and false doctrines and things like that are teaching people that sex is bad, it's dirty, it's wrong, it's this and that. When really what they should be saying is it's wrong and dangerous and harmful to you if you do it outside of marriage, okay? But it's beautiful and it's right and all these other things in marriage, okay? Because Yahuwah created it. He created it for the purpose to seal a marriage union, to cause a husband and wife to become one flesh, and for procreation. All beautiful things. The problem is like everything else, the world and men and Hasatan have taken these things and perverted it and misused it, okay? And this is why it becomes sinful. This is why it becomes sinful. It's a danger to us, brothers and sisters. And this is something else that I talked about in the previous episodes where I said, it's a danger to us in many ways, okay? And it can be harmful because you can become obsessed with this person. You can become, it can really cause a person to be unbalanced in so many ways. Not to mention soul ties that are created and formed And we're going to see some examples of this. It's dangerous, brothers and sisters. It's dangerous, and it's a really, really bad sin. It's a serious sin. It's a serious sin. And yet, sadly, it's happening so much in our world every single day. But I will tell you that one thing my personal trial taught me is that not everybody does it intentionally. Sometimes it comes upon us and you weren't even expecting it. You were totally blindsided by it, because this is one of the ways that the enemy will attack people, is through the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh. It's one of his biggest tactics that he'll use on people. So let's go ahead and look further into some of these accounts. So we looked at 1 John 2:16, and we looked at Galatians chapter 5 at the works of the flesh. So now what I want to share with you all is I want to share some scripture from the Testament of Reuben. This is something that he talks about, like his testament is all about this. If you haven't listened, I already did this book on the audio scriptures. It's a really good testament, really, really important. But I'm going to go ahead and share it here today in this episode. So I'm going to be reading from Reuben chapter 1, verses 33 through 41. Okay, so it says, "And now, my children, love the truth, and it will preserve you. Hear ye the words of Reuben your father. Pay no heed to the face of a woman, nor associate with another man's wife, nor meddle with affairs of womankind. For had I not seen Bilhah bathing in a covered place, I had not fallen into this great iniquity. For my mind, taking in the thought of the woman's nakedness, suffered me not to sleep until I had wrought the abominable thing." So I'm going to stop right there. Okay. For those of you who aren't familiar, this is Reuben. So this is the firstborn son or oldest son of Jacob. And Jacob had 4 wives, basically, because he had Leah, he had Rachel or Rahel, and then he had their maids, Bilhah and Zipporah, something like that. And Bilhah, was one of his father's wives, and Reuben saw her bathing. Okay, so lust of the eyes. Okay, he took this in with his eyes. Instead of looking away, he watched. And because he saw it, then he couldn't get it out of his mind. Okay, he could not get it out of his mind until he did something about it, right? Which for some people that could be sleeping with the person. For others, it could be masturbating and thinking about that person. I'm sorry, and I don't mean to go into detail, but it's the truth. The thing is, it plants a seed. Okay. And this is what happens. Also, we'll read another account that's very similar to this, that some of you may already been like, oh, this sounds a lot like what happened to David. Yep. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Now, there are situations, okay, where in this case right here, okay, Bilhah didn't purposefully bathe in front of him as to tease him or, anything like that. She just happened to be bathing and he happened to see her. When that happens, it is your job to look away. Okay? I know it's hard. It's tempting, right? Because you're in your flesh, right? And it's pleasing to the eyes because Yahuwah did create us to be sexual beings. But this is wrong here. And so this is where the fruit of the Ruach, or the fruit of the Spirit, self-control, comes in. Reuben should have diverted his eyes, looked away, turned away, went away. And he didn't. Okay? We'll see that same thing with David as well here shortly. Now, there's instances where an individual will purposefully and intentionally seduce someone. Okay? I've seen a lot of women do this, where they will dress provocatively and they will come onto a man. Reuben says it. He says, the women are wicked. He says it. I mean, and as a matter of fact, I'll probably read it here. Yeah, I'll go ahead and read it. So, women are wicked and deceitful and will use seduction to entice a man. Okay. And we'll see that in another account that I'm going to read. Actually, 2 of them that I'm going to share. Okay. So anyways, with that being said, let me be careful with time here. Okay, so let me just read this over again. So pay no heed to the face of a woman, nor associate with another man's wife, nor meddle with affairs of womankind. For had I not seen Bilhah bathing in a covered place, I had not fallen into this great iniquity. For my mind taking in the thought of the woman's nakedness suffered me not to sleep, until I had wrought the abominable thing. For while Jacob our father had gone to Yishak his father, when we were in Adur, near to Ephrath in Bethlehem, Bilhah became drunk and was asleep uncovered in her chamber. Having therefore gone in and beheld her nakedness, I wrought the impiety without her perceiving it, and leaving her sleeping, departed. And forthwith a messenger of Elohim revealed to my father concerning my impiety, and he came and mourned over me and touched his wife no more. Okay. So now I'm just going to read real quick. And I wasn't planning to, but hopefully I'll have time. This might be a two-parter, possibly. Okay, so in chapter 2, he says, Pay no heed, therefore, my children, to the beauty of women, nor set your mind on their affairs, but walk in singleness of heart in the fear of Yahuwah, and expend labor on good works, and on study, and on your flocks, until Yahuwah gives you a wife, whom he will that ye suffer not as I did. For until my father's death I had not boldness to look in his face, or to speak to any of my brethren because of my reproach. Even until now my conscience caused me anguish on account of my impiety. And yet my father comforted me much, and prayed for me unto Yahuwah, that the anger of Yahuwah might pass from me, even as Yahuwah showed. And thenceforth until now I have been on my guard, and sinned not. Therefore, my children, I say unto you, observe all things whatsoever I command you, and ye shall not sin. For a pit unto the soul is the sin of fornication, separating it from Elohim, and bringing it near to idols, because it deceiveth the mind and understanding, and leadeth down young men into Sheol before their time. For many have fornication destroyed, because, though a man be old or noble, or rich or poor, he bringeth reproach upon himself with the sons of men, and derision with Beliar. Okay, so lust can affect anybody. Doesn't matter if you're young, old, rich, poor. It can affect anybody, and it will destroy you eventually. Okay, and I'll talk more about that later. For ye heard regarding Yosef, which this is an account I am going to read. So here's another confirmation right here. He says, For ye heard regarding Yosef, how he guarded himself from a woman, and purged his thoughts from all fornication, and found favor in the sight of Elohim and men. For the Mitzrite woman did many things unto him, and summoned magicians, and offered him love potions, but the purpose of his soul admitted no evil desire. Therefore the Elohim of your fathers delivered him from every evil and hidden death. For fornication overcomes not your mind, neither can Beliar overcome you. For evil are women, my children, and since they have no power or strength over man, they use wiles by outward attractions, that they may draw him to themselves. This is what I was just saying. We see this today, and we've seen this for very long. As you can see, this has been going on since the beginning, okay? It hasn't changed. And whom they cannot bewitch by outward attractions, him they overcome by craft. For moreover, concerning them, the messenger of Yahuwah told me and taught me that women are overcome by the spirit of fornication more than men, and in their heart they plot against men, and by means of their adornment they deceive first their minds, and by the glance of the eye instill the poison, and then through the accomplished act they take them captive. Okay? You know, this world is really good of, talking about, oh, men are dogs, they'll sleep with anybody and anything and this, that, when really the truth of the matter is, it's women that cause men to fall. Yes, there are some men that will do it regardless, but really what it is, it's women. Okay? They beguile men. It's wickedness. It's part of Hasatan's systems and plans. And so look at what he says here. He says, for a woman cannot force a man openly, but by a harlot's bearing she beguiles him. Flee therefore fornication, my children, and command your wives and your daughters that they adorn not their heads and faces to deceive the mind, because every woman who used these wiles has been reserved for eternal punishment. And think about it. Peter even talks about this too. He tells women, it's more beautiful, right, to be humble and meek, to not have our outward appearances with all this makeup and our hair done up in all these different ways and expensive clothing or clothing that shows our figures, right? We need to be wholesome and modest in our outward appearance, brothers and sisters, or sisters is what and brothers too. You should be modest and humble as well. But this is why, this is the thing, And he even goes on to talk about the watchers. He says, "For thus they allured the watchers who were before the flood, for all these continually beheld them. They lusted after them, and they conceived the act in their mind. For they changed themselves into the shape of men, and appeared to them when they were with their husbands. And the women lusting in their minds after their forms, gave birth to giants, for the watchers appeared to them as reaching even unto the Shemaim. Beware therefore of fornication, and if you wish to be pure in mind, guard your senses from every woman." And when he says senses, he's mainly referring to the eyes. Guard your eyes. Guard your ears. What are they telling you? Are they speaking, smooth words to you? Are they trying to turn you on with their words? Seduction. Basically, they're seducing, right? They're using seduction. Okay? And then he says, "And command the women likewise not to associate with men, that they also may be pure in mind, for constant meetings." Okay? What does this refer to right here? What I just said earlier. Women are no longer in their homes anymore. They're now in the workplaces. They're now in schools. They're all over the place. These are constant meetings. This was all a part of Satan's plan. Because Yahuwah's plan is when you become a wife and mother, you are in your home. Right? When you're single, you're in your parents' home. You're under the guard of your father, right? Now, if you were homeschooled, you were home more, but now there's public schooling. But, the thing is that, you're in your home, you're in your parents' home, you're under your father, and then after that, you marry, you're under your husband, okay? And you stay home. That's your job. You keep up your home, right? You're caring for your children and so on and so forth. These constant meetings, okay, is due to the way that our world is today, okay? Homeschool still happens, but a lot of people now go to public school, right? A lot of women are no longer in the homes. They're now out working. They're out going to schools. They're out doing this and that and the next thing. This is what makes for constant meetings, okay? For constant meetings, even though the Belial, even though the Belial deed be not wrath, right, the evil deed, are to them an irremediable disease, and to us a destruction of Beliar and an eternal reproach. For in fornication there is neither understanding nor reverence, and all jealousy dwelleth in the lust thereof. This is why we see things like like the movie Fatal Attraction or the movie Obsession. Not that I'm condoning that y'all watch it. Don't watch any movies from Hollywood. But these are really good examples of why people become obsessive. They become infatuated, right? They become to the point of they're jealous. Especially if they've slept with the person, right? Because now they've created this soul tie. This is what all this does, brothers and sisters. This is what all this does, okay? And that's all I'm going to read from the Testament of Reuben. But, this has been going on since the beginning. These are the dangers that come from it, brothers and sisters. Now, the next one that I wanted to share is what happened with Joseph or Yosef in Genesis 34. Now, in the Testament of Joseph, it goes into more detail, but due to time constraints, I'm just going to read real quick the verses that I wrote down. And again, I might have to do this in two parts because there's quite a bit here. But Yosef goes into more detail about what he endured with that Mitzrite woman, and how hard that was for him. I mean, he went through it. I mean, it was not easy for him. And he was young. He was all of maybe 18, 19 years old, I think. And he went through this. And at that age, young men's hormones are just all over the place. So the fact that, praise be to Yah, he was able to withstand that temptation and that trial and that stronghold is incredible. So let's look at Genesis 34, and we're going to read 1 through, that's not Yosef. That's another one. Hang on a minute, sorry. 39, so chapter 39, 1 through 20. And Joseph had been taken down to Mitzrayim, so that's Egypt. And Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, a Mitzrite, bought him from the Ishmaelites, who had taken him down there. And it came to be that Yahuwah was with Joseph, and he became a prosperous man, and was in the house of his master the Mitzrite. And his master saw that Yahuwah was with him, and that Yahuwah made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his eyes, and served him, and he appointed him over his house, and gave into his hand all that he had. And it came to be from the time that he appointed him over his house, and all that he had, that Yahuwah baraked the Mitzrite house for Joseph's sake. And the barakah of Yahuwah was on all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left in Joseph's hand all that he had, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. And Joseph was handsome in form and handsome in appearance. And after these events, it came to be that his master's wife lifted up her eyes to Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has given into my hand all that he has. No one is greater in this house than I, and he has not withheld whatever from me but you, because you are his wife. And how shall I do this great evil and sin against Elohim?" And it came to be, as she spoke to Joseph day by day, that he did not listen to her, to lie with her, to be with her. And it came to be on a certain day, when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand, and fled and ran outside. So I'm actually going to stop there. I'm not going to read to verse 20, and I'm actually going to go ahead and share what he shared in his testament, because it was bad. Like, it doesn't go into detail there in Genesis, but in his testament, he shares this woman literally tried to, not only she tried to seduce him, she tried to poison him, or she tried to do like love potions to him. She tried all kinds. She got to the point where she was threatening to kill herself or kill her husband. I can't remember what exactly it was, but it got bad. Some serious fatal attraction stuff. I just have to find it, brothers and sisters. So this is definitely going to be a part 1 and then a part 2 because there's so much that I want to go into here. Let's see, because there's a lot in here. Okay, let's see. Okay. I'm going to start with 3. Chapter 3. So this is the testament of Joseph. Chapter 3. Or in chapter 2, he says that he struggled with a shameless woman who kept prodding me to transgress with her, but the Elohim of my father rescued me from the burning flame. Okay. Now go down to chapter 3. He says, how often the Mitzrite woman, so he's referring to Potiphar's wife, threatened me with death. How often after turning me over to the tormentor, she would call me back and threaten me. But since I was unwilling to have intercourse with her, she kept saying to me, "You will be master over me and all my household if you will only give yourself over to me. Then you will be our ruler." But I recalled my father's words and went weeping into my quarters and prayed to Yahuwah. For those 7 years I fasted, and yet seemed to the Mitzrites like someone who was living luxuriously. For those who fast for the sake of Elohim receive graciousness of countenance. So it looks like he went through this for 7 years. Can you imagine that? 7 years, and he never not once gave in. He never not once gave in. That is some serious self-control, and that is somebody who has the fruits of the Ruach and somebody who is truly following Yahuwah. 7 years, this woman tormented him and went after him and would seduce him. And listen to everything else she did. Look at. If my master was absent, I drank no wine. For 3-day periods, I would take no food, but give it to the poor and the ill. I would awaken early and pray to Yahuwah, weeping over the Mitzrite woman of Memphis, because she troubled me exceedingly and relentlessly. In the night, she would come in to me, pretending a mere visit. Because she had no male child, she pretended to regard me as a son. For a time she would embrace me as a son, but then I realized later that she was trying to lure me into fornication. She was trying to seduce him. When I became aware of this, I lamented to the point of death. After she had gone out, I came to myself and mourned on her behalf for many days, because I had recognized her deceit and her deviousness. I declared to her the words of the Most High, hoping he might divert her from evil desire. Chapter 4. How often then did she flatter me with words as a Kodesh man, deceitfully praising my self-control through her words in the presence of her husband. But when we were alone, she sought to seduce me. Publicly, she honored me for my self-control, while privately she said to me, "Have no fear of my husband, for he is convinced of your chastity, so that even if someone were to tell him about you, he would not believe it." So in other words, she's like, hey, listen, don't even worry about my husband, because he believes you to be chaste and that you would never do something like that. So, even if you really do sleep with me and he were to find out, he's not going to believe it, right? That's what she's basically saying. During all these affairs, I stretched out on the ground, praying Elohim to rescue me from her treachery. When she achieved nothing by means of it, she began to approach me for instruction, so that she might learn the word of Elohim. And she kept saying to me, "If you want me to abandon the idols, have intercourse with me. And I shall persuade my husband to put away the idols, and we shall and we shall walk in the Torah of your Elohim." But I kept telling her that Yahuwah did not want worshipers who come by means of uncleanness. So there's that word, right? Paul used that word in the works of the flesh. Nor would he be pleased with adulterers. There's the other one. But with those who are pure in heart and undefiled in speech. But nevertheless, she was consumed with jealousy, wanting to fulfill her desire. There's the other one, jealousy, another works of the flesh. All of this connects, brothers and sisters. But I devoted myself the more to fasting and prayer that Yahuwah might rescue me from her. Chapter 5. Again, another occasion, she said to me, "If you do not want to commit adultery, I shall kill my husband, buy a drug, and take you as my husband." Listen to this, brother. Have we not seen these in these Hollywood movies, right? Like I said, Fatal Attraction, the movie Obsession. I mean, listen to what this is how sick this woman was. This is how badly she was lusting after Joseph, that she was willing to do all these things. And look at what it did to Joseph. And praise Yah, he never gave in. But look at what all of this caused, right? So he says, "When I heard this, I tore my clothing and said to her, 'Woman, show reverence to Elohim. Do not commit this wicked deed, lest you be utterly destroyed. For you should know that I shall make it known to all that is your scheme.' And filled with fear, she pleaded with me not to disclose her plan. Then she withdrew, but kept trying to entice me with gifts and every manner of pleasurable things." Chapter 6. Later, she sent me food mixed with enchantments. So she tried to do a love potion on him. And brothers and sisters, that exists in this world, okay? People legit do that. It's witchcraft. When the eunuch who was carrying it arrived, I looked up and saw a frightening man who offered me a sword along with the bowl. So I perceived it was a trick to lead me astray. When he departed, I wept. I tasted neither one item nor the other of the food he brought. A day later, she came to me and said, when she recognized the food, "Why didn't you eat the food?" And I said to her, "Because you filled it with a deadly enchantment. How can you say, 'I do not go near idols, but only to Yahuwah'?" Right? And so then, let's skip to chapter 7. It says, "But her heart was still inclined to evil, and she turned over in her mind how she might entrap me. Shortly she was sighing deeply and depressed, even though she was not sick. When her husband saw her, he said to her, 'Why are you so downcast?' And she responded to him, 'I am suffering from a pain in my heart, and groans in my spirit have taken hold of me.'" Remember when Reuben said in his testament that he couldn't sleep until he did something about it. Lust, when you lust after somebody, when you're infatuated with them, when you're obsessed, you get to the point that if you don't do something about it, you literally cannot function throughout the day, as you can see. And we'll see more of that as well in the other accounts. She's at the point of depression. She tells her husband that, "I have a pain in my heart." Reuben said he couldn't sleep until he had done what he did, right? Verse 3, he tried to cure her with words. Then she seized the occasion and came running into me while her husband was still outside and said to me, I shall hang myself or hurl myself over the cliff if you will not lie with me. Since I perceived that the spirit of Beliar was troubling her, I prayed to Yahuwah, but I said to her, why, wretched woman, are you troubled and disturbed, blinded by sin? Remember that if you kill yourself, Asthatha, your husband's concubine, who is filled with envy of you, will beat your children, thus you will destroy your memory from the earth. And she said, see then, you do love me, that is enough. Only keep contending for my life and that of my children, and I shall cling to my expectation of gaining my desire. She did not understand that I spoke in this way for my master's sake and not for hers. For if anyone is subjected to the passion of desire and is enslaved by it, and she was, even when he hears something good, he receives it with a view to aid his wicked desire. In other words, you become blinded by lust. When you're so sick to the point that you're lusting after an individual, to the point that you're blinded, anything you hear from them or anybody else or whatever, you're going to perceive it the way that you want it to sound, because that's how badly you want to be with that person. That's how badly you want to fulfill the desires, the desires of the lust that you have going on. Okay. And then he says, I tell you, my children, it was about the 6th hour when she left me. Bending my knees before Yahuwah, I prayed a whole day and a whole night. Toward dawn, I arose crying and begging deliverance from her. I mean, poor Joseph was to the point of he needed deliverance from this stronghold. He went through this 7 years. And then look what it says, and this is what we read in Genesis. Finally, she, grasping my clothing, determined to force me into having intercourse with her. So now she was getting to the point. She was going to basically try to rape him. She couldn't take it no more. She said, when I saw, therefore, that in her madness she had seized my garment, I left and fled naked. Okay. So brothers and sisters, it's a serious, serious thing. Okay, it is a very wicked stronghold for both parties involved. Whether both parties are, what's the word I'm looking for? Reciprocal to it or not. And it's one-sided, right? It damages, regardless whether it's one-sided or two-sided, where it's reciprocal, it damages, brothers and sisters. It is a serious matter that you do not want to get involved in. I'm telling you firsthand because I went through this, okay? And that's what I'm going to be sharing towards the end after I've shared the rest of the accounts from Scripture. I'm nearing the end of my time limit. And so this is going to be 2 parts. So this is going to be part 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and record a part 2. Because I wasn't even planning to read all of that, but I was like, you know what, let me just read in detail what exactly Joseph went through and what this, Potiphar's wife, what she went through and what she was dealing with. It overcame her so strong, and look at what it did to Joseph. And so far we see that Joseph's testament and Reuben's testament connect when it comes to that topic. And we're going to see some other things as well, brothers and sisters, and that's even an example of a soul tie. You know what I mean? Because think about it. Joseph was in her house every day. So she would interact with him. And, you can form bonds and soul ties that way without being physical with somebody. You can still get emotionally connected and attached to somebody, and that can still form a soul tie. A lot of people think that soul ties are just through sex. It can be through, words and emotion as well. I know because I went through it. Okay. So we read, 1 John 2:16, where he talks about lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life. Then, it connects to what Paul tells us in Galatians 5 when he talks about the works of the flesh. And then we read from the testament of Reuben, and we read from the testament of Joseph. And we also read some verses in Genesis that confirms and connects all of that. Okay. So this is going to be the end of part 1. I will begin part 2 shortly after I publish part 1. And we will go into other accounts that I have that I want to share with you all that falls under the lines of lust and so on. And then towards the end, I will share a little bit of some of what I endured and the trial that I went through concerning the same thing. And again, I'm doing this word with the hopes to help people to understand how important it is for us to guard our purity. That's another episode I did. I did an episode on guarding your purity, how important it is for us to guard our eyes and to stay away from the lust of the eyes and the lust of the flesh. All right, so that is it for part 1, brothers and sisters. Again, please, I cannot express this enough. I don't know why this happens, but whenever I do a series or episodes in parts, please make sure you listen to them in order. Very, very vital that you do that. Be sure you listen to them in order. If not, it may not make sense, and you're going to be missing a lot of great information as well. So just want to encourage you all that as well. So, all right, brothers and sisters, that's it for part 1. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk with you in part 2. Shalom.